I used to think my life was pretty normal, at least, normal in the way you convince yourself it is because you don't know anything different. My name's Landon. I'm 27 now, and I was raised by my mom, just the two of us in a small house on the edge of town. According to her, my dad left when I was 3. No warning, no goodbye. She told me he just couldn't handle the responsibility. Said he ran off to start a new life and didn't want anything to do with me. I grew up believing he was the kind of man who could walk away from his own child without a second thought. And if I'm being honest, for most of my life, I hated him for it. Whenever I asked questions as a kid, Mom would brush them off. "He's not worth your time," she'd say. "You're better off without him." Sometimes she'd get a little misty-eyed, like it really hurt her to talk about it. Other times, she'd stiffen up, like even remembering him made her angry. But the story was always the same. He was selfish. He abandoned us. We were stronger without him. I didn't push too hard. I figured if he didn't want me, then I didn't want him either. Still, there was always this quiet ache I couldn't shake. At school, when other kids made Father's Day cards, I'd sit there drawing something random just to have something to do with my hands. At birthdays, holidays, graduations, that empty chair didn't go unnoticed. Mom filled the void as best she could. She worked 2 jobs, took me to soccer games when she could, tried to be both parents at once. And I gave her credit for that. I did. But even as I got older, even as I told myself I didn't care, part of me always wondered what it would have been like if he'd stayed. Fast forward to a few months ago. I was living alone in a rented apartment downtown, working a decent job in IT, trying to keep my life quiet and simple. No drama, no chaos. Then one night, there was a knock at my door. It was late, just past 9 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. At first, I thought maybe it was a neighbor or maybe a package delivery gone wrong. But when I opened the door, I saw a man I didn't recognize. Late 40s, maybe 50s. Tall, graying hair, kind of worn, looking like life had put him through the ringer. He had this nervous energy about him, like he wasn't sure whether to speak or run. He held a small folder in his hands, like he was gripping it for dear life. "Landon?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost like he was afraid of the answer. I hesitated. "Yeah." He swallowed. I'm your father." I stared at him. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I thought it had to be some kind of joke. Some scam. I actually glanced down the hall, half expecting a camera crew to pop out and yell, "Gotcha." But there was no camera. No prank. Just this man, this stranger, standing in front of me, looking like he was about to break. Then he said something that shattered everything. "I've been fighting to see you for 20 years, he said, his voice cracking. "Your mom told me you wanted nothing to do with me." It didn't register at first. My brain just kind of stalled. I blinked, trying to piece together what he was saying. Fighting? 20 years. My mom told him what? I have proof, he added quickly, fumbling with the folder in his hands. He opened it and pulled out a stack of papers. Legal documents, court letters, custody requests, return receipts, all with my name on them, all signed, all ignored. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. My stomach twisted as I scanned the papers. I didn't understand all the legal jargon, but I didn't need to. It was right there in black and white. He hadn't walked away. He'd tried. Again and again. He'd filed for visitation. Tried to get phone calls. Sent letters. He'd been shut out. Erased. And Mom had told me he left. I didn't know what to say. I invited him in, and we sat on the couch in this awkward, surreal silence. He looked around like he couldn't believe he was really here, in my home. I could barely look at him, not because I was angry at him, because I wasn't. Not anymore. I was angry at her. Furious. But I didn't know how to process any of it. He started telling me stories about when I was born, about how he and my mom met, about how they'd fought constantly toward the end, but how he never wanted to leave me behind. He said he paid child support religiously, even when he was barely scraping by. But every time he tried to reach out, Mom shut it down. "She said you hated me," he said, his voice breaking again. "That you didn't want me in your life. That you'd scream and cry if I ever showed up. I didn't want to hurt you more than I already had." I just sat there, numb, trying to remember every time I'd asked about him. Every time Mom had shut it down. Every look. Every offhand comment. And the worst part? I'd believed her. When he finally left that night, he gave me his number. Told me to call if I ever wanted to talk. Said he understood if I didn't. That he just needed me to know the truth. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't go to work the next day. I just sat on the floor of my apartment, staring at those papers, trying to reconcile the man I'd just met with the one my mom had described my whole life. I called her that afternoon. She didn't answer. I called again and again. Finally, I drove to her house. She opened the door like nothing was wrong, smiling. "Landon, what a surprise." I didn't even say hello. I just held up the papers and said, "Why did you lie to me?" Her smile faded instantly. Her face went pale. "Landon, I don't know what that is, but..." "Don't," I snapped. "Don't lie again." For a moment, she just stood there. Then she crossed her arms and said something I'll never forget. "I did what I had to do. You were better off without him." That was it. No apology. No regret. Just justification. I don't even remember what I said after that. My ears were ringing. My hands were shaking. I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That was the day everything changed. The moment I realized my childhood wasn't what I thought it was. That the person I trusted most had manipulated me. For what? Control? Spite? I didn't know yet. But I was going to find out. And once I did, I'd make sure she regretted ever trying to rewrite my story. The days after that night felt like trying to walk through fog. I kept replaying his words. "I've been fighting to see you for 20 years. I kept staring at those legal papers, trying to remember if I'd ever seen a single letter, card, or even a missed call with his name on it. I hadn't. Not one. My mom had erased him from my life so completely, it was like he'd never existed. But now that I knew the truth, I couldn't go back. And once you open that door, once the illusion shatters, you start noticing everything else that never quite made sense. I didn't talk to Mom for 3 days. Not out of strategy, just because I didn't trust myself to speak without screaming. On the 4th day, I got a text from her like nothing happened. "Dinner this weekend? Aunt Marla's coming over. She'd love to see you." I stared at my phone, shaking. It was like she thought the conversation never happened. Like the lies she carried for 2 decades didn't matter. I didn't respond. A few hours later, she sent another text. "Are you still mad? I thought you'd understand by now. I only did what was best for you. Best for me." That line kept echoing in my head. I used to believe her when she said that. She always had this way of justifying things, like every decision she made, no matter how controlling or cold, was actually her being protective. Growing up, I thought that was love. That sacrificing someone's freedom or honesty was a mother's way of keeping you safe. But now I couldn't tell if she ever actually saw me as a person, or just as something she wanted to control. I finally responded a day later. "We need to talk. Just us." She invited me over that Sunday. Her house hadn't changed. Same gray furniture, same picture frames, same scent of oversprayed lemon cleaner in the hallway. She smiled when she opened the door like we were old friends reconnecting. "Landon, sweetheart," she said, reaching for a hug. I didn't return it. I walked past her into the kitchen and placed the folder of court documents on the table. "I want answers," I said. "Real ones. No spin. No more lies." She sat down across from me slowly, folding her hands in front of her like she was preparing for a debate. "I don't know what he told you, but..." "I've read everything," I interrupted. "The custody requests. The visitation filings. You told him I didn't want to see him. That I hated him." "What?" She flinched, just for a second. "Because you were better off," she said, her voice sharp. "He was unstable. He moved around constantly. He had no career. I didn't want you getting attached and then watching him disappear again." "But he didn't disappear," I said. "You pushed him out. You made me believe he didn't care about me." Her lips thinned. "You needed consistency. Structure. I gave you that." "No," I snapped. "You gave me your version of the truth. You made decisions for me. You lied to me." There was a long silence. Then, without a shred of remorse, she said, "You should be grateful. You turned out just fine." That was the moment I realized she truly didn't get it. Or worse, didn't care. The next few weeks were a blur of awkward conversations, missed calls, and late-night texts from my dad, James. We started small, just getting coffee. He brought photos of me as a baby, some of him holding me in the hospital. I never knew those existed. He told me about his side of the family, about how his own parents tried to keep up contact too, but were blocked just like him. There were birthday cards he'd written and never sent. Letters he mailed that were returned unopened. He still had copies. But the more I talked to him, the more I started realizing something deeper. Mom didn't just lie to me about him. She cut me off from an entire side of myself. A whole family. A whole identity. She'd shaped my life to fit her narrative, then punished me emotionally anytime I tried to question it. And that's when other memories started hitting differently. Like how she always made me feel guilty for spending time with friends. How she hated it whenever I brought up moving to another city. How she never celebrated any of my accomplishments unless she could frame them as her sacrifices paying off. Then came the moment that cracked everything open. One afternoon, I was helping James go through some boxes in his storage unit. He was moving closer to my city, just renting for now. He handed me an old envelope labeled, "For Landon, do not open." Inside was a letter he'd tried to send when I turned 16. It said, "I know you might not want to hear from me. Maybe you think I left you. I didn't. I've been fighting for years. I just want you to know that you're loved. That you always were. I'm proud of you, even if I don't get to see who you're becoming." I didn't cry. I just sat there with it in my hands, numb. 16. That was the year Mom refused to let me go on a class trip because she said something felt off. That was the year she grounded me for getting a B in algebra and said I was starting to act entitled. She read that letter. I knew it. She intercepted it. She chose not to give it to me. That night, I confronted her again. This time, I didn't go in angry. I went in calm. Cold. She was sitting on the couch watching some baking competition show. She muted the TV when she saw me. "Did you read the letter he sent me when I turned 16? I asked. Her eyes flickered. Just enough to give it away. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie." She set the remote down carefully. "It wasn't appropriate. You were going through a rough time. I didn't want to confuse you. You didn't want to lose control." The words sat heavy between us. She laughed, this bitter, disbelieving sound. "Oh, so now I'm the villain? After everything I gave up for you." "You didn't give anything up," I said. "You took away my choices. You stole years from both of us." Her face tightened. "You're not a parent. You don't know what it's like to make those calls." "I did what I had to." "You keep saying that," I said. "But you didn't have to. You chose to." She didn't respond. Just stared at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. I left without saying goodbye. And that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because a week later, I got a message from my cousin Megan, Mom's niece. We weren't super close, but we followed each other on social media. She sent me a screenshot of a Facebook post Mom made in a private family group. It said, "After everything I've done for Landon, he's now running around with his deadbeat father, calling me a liar, acting like I ruined his life. All because of some old documents and manipulative stories. I gave that boy everything. And this is how he repays me. I don't want him at Christmas. Let him spend it with the man who abandoned him." It was like being stabbed in the back all over again. She was trying to control the story again, rewrite it to save face, paint herself as the martyr. And worse, she was doing it publicly. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I didn't call her. I just let the silence sit. But something shifted in me that day. It wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about lies or withheld letters. It was about the pattern. The way she twisted facts, rewrote memories, and tried to bend the truth until it served her. And I knew, if I didn't do something, she'd keep doing it. Not just to me, to everyone, to her friends, to the rest of our family, maybe even to herself. That's when I started making a plan. Not for revenge, not at first. Just for clarity, for truth. I wanted to know how deep this went. What else she had hidden. Who else she had lied to. And the more I uncovered, the more I realized it wasn't just about my dad. There were other secrets, other manipulations. And if she thought I'd stay quiet, she didn't know me anymore. I hit rock bottom the week before Christmas. There wasn't a single moment that broke me. It was everything all at once. The weight of 27 years of false memories. The anger, the confusion, the shame of not knowing my own story. And then there was the Facebook post. Seeing my mom, right, that I was running around with my deadbeat father, like I was some rebellious teenager chasing drama. That gutted me in a way I didn't know was possible. And the worst part? Some of my relatives actually believed her. A few liked the post. Some left vague, passive-aggressive comments like, "You always did your best, hun." And sometimes kids don't understand until they have kids of their own. One of my uncles even chimed in with, "That man was never any good. I told you that when they were dating." I read every comment, every like, every subtle nod of support for her, and not a single one for me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reply and blast screenshots of the court documents, the letters, the proof. But I didn't. I didn't say a word. I just deleted Facebook that night and sat on the floor of my living room until the sun came up. That was my lowest point. I didn't leave the apartment for 2 days. Didn't eat much. Didn't respond to messages, even from James. He sent me a few check-ins. No pressure, just here if you need anything. But I couldn't even bring myself to text him back. I was angry at her, but I was also angry at myself. Angry for believing her for so long. Angry that I let her take so much of my life and never once questioned it. What kind of man does that? What kind of son? The self-blame was heavy. And then there was the loneliness. Holidays were always just me and Mom. No cousins. No big family dinners. Just us and a cheap turkey she'd complain about cooking. I thought it was because money was tight. I thought she didn't want me around people who wouldn't understand our bond. But now I realized she'd pushed them away. Or worse, lied to them too. And me? I had no one left. Until James called me on Christmas Eve. I didn't want to answer. I almost let it ring out. But something in me, maybe just the need to not feel alone, made me pick up. His voice was quiet. Hey, Landon. I wasn't going to bother you. I made too much food. Got this tiny tree, decorated it myself. Looks like a disaster. Figured if you wanted to stop by, even for a minute. I didn't respond right away. But I remember looking around my apartment, the cold gray light coming through the blinds, the silence. And I thought, maybe I didn't want to be alone tonight. I drove over. His apartment was small, barely furnished, but warm. The kind of warmth that came from someone trying. There were candles burning. A lopsided tree in the corner with half the ornaments sliding off the branches. A folding table set up with mismatched plates. He looked nervous when he opened the door, like I might turn around and walk away. But I didn't. I stepped inside. That night didn't fix everything. But it started something. We talked for hours. About everything. About nothing. I asked questions I didn't even know I had. He answered all of them honestly. Even when it made him look bad. He told me he had messed up when I was little. That he and Mom fought constantly. That he drank too much back then, not in a scary way. Just enough to miss deadlines, lose jobs, say things he didn't mean. But when he got clean, when he got his life together, he tried to come back. And by then, Mom had already shut the door and bolted it shut. He showed me a drawer in his kitchen full of cards he'd written and never sent. Father's Day, birthdays, high school graduation, letters he didn't have the address for, or that came back stamped return to sender. He kept every one. That drawer broke me all over again. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone. After that night, I started coming over more. Sometimes we'd just hang out and watch football, or cook something terrible and pretend it was edible. Sometimes we'd talk about deeper stuff. Other times we'd just exist in the same room, like we were slowly trying to stitch something back together without forcing it. I didn't realize it at the time, but I'd started rebuilding. Quietly. In pieces. The first thing I did was pull out an old notebook and start writing down everything I remembered. Every moment with Mom that felt off. Every time she discouraged me from asking questions about him. Every time she twisted reality just enough to serve her narrative. I needed to see it on paper. To remind myself I wasn't crazy. Next, I started calling extended family. I didn't bring up Mom at first. I just reached out. Asked how they were. Reintroduced myself. Some were surprised to hear from me. Others were hesitant, polite, but distant. But after a few calls, I started asking questions. Like why they never came around when I was a kid. Why Mom always said they weren't interested. My Aunt Shelby, who I barely remembered, was the first one to crack. Sweetheart, she said, her voice trembling a little, we tried. We reached out every year. Your mom? She just said you didn't want us involved. That you hated big family gatherings. That we stressed you out. She sent me an old voicemail she'd kept from 10 years ago of Mom telling her, Landon doesn't want to be part of the circus you call a family. Please respect his wishes and don't send anything for his birthday. I listened to it twice. Then I cried. I realized my world had been smaller than it ever needed to be. Not because people didn't care, but because one person decided they shouldn't. I kept digging, kept reconnecting. Found out I had a cousin in med school. Another who ran a photography business in Portland. A great uncle who was still alive and remembered teaching me how to fish once. They remembered me. They'd missed me. I hadn't just lost a dad. I'd lost a network of people who might have made life feel a little less lonely growing up. Meanwhile, James introduced me to his side of the family. Slowly, respectfully. I met his sister, who cried the second she saw me. His mom, my grandma, had passed a few years ago, but he showed me pictures of us together when I was a baby. There was one of her holding me in a rocking chair, smiling so big her eyes were barely open. I'd never seen her face before, never even heard her name. It was like discovering a whole half of myself had been buried. By February, I'd started seeing a therapist. At first, I wasn't sure it would help. I'd always thought therapy was for people who couldn't manage things on their own. But the truth was, I couldn't. I didn't know how to process the years of manipulation, the guilt, the anger, the grief of a childhood that never really existed the way I thought it did. My therapist, a woman named Riley, helped me name things I'd never known how to name. Emotional enmeshment, control disguised as care, covert narcissism. We unpacked memories I'd buried. She helped me stop blaming myself, helped me start separating my truth from Mom's version of it. Week by week, I felt lighter. By March, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. But I wasn't going to blow up her life with a social media post or a shouting match. That wasn't me. I wanted to do this smart. I wanted the truth to come out in a way that couldn't be spun or twisted. I wanted the receipts. So I started compiling everything. Court records, letters, voice messages, family testimonies. Every piece of proof I had that contradicted her version of the story. I organized it into folders, physical and digital. Not to use as a weapon. Not yet. But to have. Just in case. And maybe, one day, to show others who deserve to know the truth. I wasn't rushing into revenge. I was building the foundation first. Rebuilding my life, not just my case. And slowly, things started shifting. I started sleeping better, eating better, laughing more. I reconnected with an old friend from college and told them everything. They listened, didn't judge, just said, "You deserve better. I'm glad you're finally getting it." I got a raise at work. Started volunteering on weekends. Started journaling every morning. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was performing a version of myself for someone else's approval. I was just me. And every day, I grew a little more comfortable with that. But deep down, I knew the calm wouldn't last forever. Because the more I grew, the more desperate she'd become to pull me back. And sure enough, just as spring rolled in, so did another letter from Mom. This one wasn't sweet. It wasn't an apology. It was a warning. And it changed everything. It arrived in a plain white envelope with my name handwritten on the front. No return address. No stamp. Which meant one thing. She dropped it off herself. I stared at it for a while before opening it. My heart was steady, but something in the back of my head whispered, "Don't do it. Let it rot in the trash." I should have listened. But I didn't. Inside was a 3-page letter written in my mother's familiar, careful cursive. The kind she used when writing sympathy cards or thank you notes. The first line hit me like a slap. "You've made your choice, so I'm making mine." The letter wasn't an apology. It was a veiled threat disguised as motherly concern. Page after page of self-pity, manipulation, and carefully worded accusations. She said she couldn't sleep knowing how I'd been poisoned against her. That I'd fallen into the trap of revisionist history, letting a man with a track record of failure rewrite 20 years of truth. She claimed she had protected me from trauma, and now I was dragging her name through the mud to feel powerful. She mentioned things she shouldn't have known. Conversations I'd had with extended family. People I'd spoken to. Things James had told me in confidence. That's when it clicked. She was reaching out to them behind my back. At the end of the letter, in bold ink, she wrote, "You can either let this go and come home, or I can start telling people what really happened during those years. I'm tired of being silent. And you're not the only one who can make noise." There it was. The line she thought would scare me into crawling back. The line that said, "I will ruin your reputation if you don't fall in line." Except this wasn't the same Landon she'd raised. I wasn't 17 anymore, desperate for her approval. I wasn't the boy who thought silence was love and obedience was peace. She didn't realize that everything she thought could be used against me was already mine. I sat with the letter for a day, then called James. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, kid. I think it's time," I said. "I'm done playing defense." There was a long pause. Then he said quietly, "What do you need me to do?" And just like that, the planning began. I started with a spreadsheet. Yes, a literal spreadsheet. I listed everything I knew, everything I had proof of, and every person who'd been pulled into her version of reality. I created categories: witnesses, evidence, timeline, leverage. I wasn't trying to be petty. I was trying to be precise. James gave me access to a box of old legal files he'd kept in his storage unit, including an affidavit he'd filed in 2010 trying to re-establish visitation. It included a statement about a recorded phone call with my mom, one where she allegedly said, "He doesn't even know you exist anymore. Don't call again." The recording was gone. He'd lost it during a move, but the affidavit was official, signed and notarized. It gave me a window of time. I dug through email archives, old letters, anything I could find. And then, I struck gold. An old USB drive buried in a shoebox at James's place. He thought it was just full of work documents. But tucked inside one folder labeled taxes was a .mp3 file named simply call_Jan_2010. I opened it. There she was. Her voice, unmistakable. And the line? "He's my son, not yours. You can keep sending your little letters, but he'll never see them. I make sure of that." I sat back in the chair, staring at the screen. There it was. Proof she'd knowingly blocked contact. That she'd intentionally severed the bond between us. Not to protect me, not out of fear, but because she wanted total control. I backed that file up in 5 different places. Then I called Megan, my cousin who'd first sent me the screenshot of the Facebook post. We'd grown closer over the past few months. She'd been distant from Mom for years, mostly because of how Mom treated her after her parents' divorce. "Landon," she said when she picked up, "please tell me this isn't another bombshell." "I found a recording," I said. "I need to play it for you." I met her the next day and let her listen. Her face went pale halfway through. She covered her mouth and shook her head. "She always told us she tried to keep your dad involved," she said. "Said he was dangerous, unreliable, that he'd disappear for months, and that you were the one who didn't want anything to do with him. She made sure everyone believed it," I said. "She rewrote history." Megan sat in silence for a moment, then looked at me with fire in her eyes. "What do you want to do?" "I want the truth out," I said, "but I want to do it right. No shouting match. No drama. I want to be calm, collected, and undeniable." She nodded slowly. "Then you're going to need allies." Over the next few weeks, Megan and I worked quietly. She reached out to other cousins, aunts, and even one of Mom's old friends who'd been ghosted years ago for picking sides. One by one, we told them what happened. One by one, we shared documents, letters, screenshots, the recording. Some were shocked. Some cried. A few admitted they'd always suspected Mom exaggerated things, but they'd been afraid to say anything. She was the kind of person who could freeze you out of her life like flipping a switch. She wielded isolation like a weapon, and no one wanted to be the next target. But now they were listening, and I wasn't stopping there. I reached out to Riley, my therapist, and asked for help drafting a letter. A clear, composed, evidence-backed account of the last 27 years. Not emotional, not vindictive, just factual, with timestamps, references, and a few key attachments. It took 2 weeks to get it right, but when it was done, it was airtight. I printed 30 copies. Then came the final piece. I reached out to a local attorney, a soft-spoken, no-nonsense guy named Mr. Halvorsen. I didn't want to sue. I didn't want money, but I did want options. Legal options. Protection. He reviewed everything. "I'll be honest," he said, flipping through the binder I handed him. "This is one of the clearest patterns of parental alienation I've seen that never went to court." "Can I file anything retroactively?" I asked. "Not easily," he said, "but you can make a formal declaration. You can protect yourself if she starts spreading lies. And depending on how far you want to take this, you can submit a request to have this documented with the family court. You have more power than you think." That was all I needed to hear. I wasn't trying to burn her world down. I just wanted her to stop thinking she could light mine on fire and walk away without getting singed. So I waited for the right moment. And it came, just 2 weeks later. I was at work when I got a call from Megan. "She's planning something," she said. "She's telling people you're threatening her, that you're harassing her with your dad. She's trying to build a case." My heart didn't even race. I just smiled. "Perfect," I said. "Let her try." I'd already drafted my response, already prepared the documents, already notified my lawyer, already made peace with who I used to be and who I wasn't anymore. The next move was mine. It all came to a head on a Sunday afternoon in May. Mother's Day, to be specific. She was hosting her usual small gathering. Just a few relatives who still tiptoed around her orbit, mostly out of habit or obligation. Megan was invited, though she hadn't RSVP'd. Neither had I. That was intentional. She didn't know that half the people invited had already heard the recording, or read the affidavit, or seen the timeline of court filings and letter receipts, all neatly backed by stamps and dates. She didn't know that her carefully spun narrative had already started to unravel in whispers behind her back, whispers that were growing louder. By noon, Megan sent me a text. She's telling everyone you're trying to sue her, saying she's scared you'll show up. I didn't reply. Instead, I got in my car, folder in hand, and drove across town. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't even going to stay long. But it was time she saw the version of me she'd spent years trying to erase. The version that couldn't be manipulated, guilt-tripped, or lied to anymore. When I pulled up, I saw the usual cars in the driveway. Her silver Lexus, Uncle Dean's pickup, my cousin Haley's beat-up Corolla. The screen door was open, and from outside I could already hear her laugh, loud, exaggerated, the way she always performed when she had an audience. I knocked. The conversation inside stopped instantly. After a moment, she appeared at the door, her expression flickering between shock and something much colder. But she smiled, that tight, strained version she used when she was caught off guard. Landon, I didn't expect. I held up a hand. Don't. I'm not here to stay. I just want to give you this. I handed her the folder. She glanced at it like it might bite her, then stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. What is this? She asked. Evidence, I said. Everything. The letters you hid. The calls you lied about. The affidavit. And the recording. It's all in there. Her eyes narrowed. You're trying to destroy me. No, I said calmly. You did that on your own. I'm just correcting the record. She looked past me, like she was scanning for witnesses. This is your father's influence. I knew it. This is my decision, I said. And you don't get to hide behind doing your best anymore. You lied. You manipulated me. You cut me off from half my life, then tried to pretend it was noble. She crossed her arms. What do you want? An apology? Money. I want nothing from you, I said, except for you to understand that you no longer control the narrative. I've told the truth, and I'll keep telling it. She opened the folder and flipped through a few pages. Her face went pale when she saw the transcript of the 2010 call. She stopped when she got to the statement from Megan, how Mom used emotional manipulation to isolate me from extended family. And then the screenshot of her Facebook post, followed by my annotated breakdown of each false claim she made in it, cross-referenced with actual records. You think anyone will believe this? She hissed. You think they'll take his side? After everything I gave up for you. They already do, I said. They've heard the recording, seen the court records. They believe me. The mask slipped for just a second. There was a flicker of fear behind her eyes. And that was enough. I've also filed a formal statement with the family court, I added. Not suing you. Just documenting everything. Just in case you try to spin this into something it's not. And if you spread another lie about me or James, I'll take it further. Her jaw tightened. You ungrateful little. I'm done, I said, cutting her off. I'm not a child anymore. And you don't get to threaten me into silence. I turned to leave. She didn't follow. Didn't call out. Just stood there, frozen on the porch with the folder in her hands. As I reached my car, the front door creaked open again. Haley stepped outside, followed by Megan. Then Aunt Lisa. One by one, they came out, each glancing at my mom, then at me. No one said anything, but they didn't go back inside. That night, Megan texted me. She tried to explain everything after you left. No one bought it. Lisa told her she needed help. Uncle Dean just shook his head and walked out. She's never looked smaller. A few days later, I got a Facebook friend request from Aunt Lisa. Then Haley. Then Uncle Dean. Slowly, the family I'd been told wanted nothing to do with me started showing up. As for James, he cried when I told him what happened. Not big, dramatic tears. Just quiet ones. Relief, I think. Closure. I showed him the court filing. He read it 3 times. You didn't have to go this far, he said. I did, I said. Not for you. Not even for me. For the truth. Summer came, and with it, peace. Real peace. The kind you don't notice at first, because you're not used to stillness. I kept seeing my therapist. Kept rebuilding my relationships. Kept moving forward. Mom didn't reach out again. I heard through Megan that she was taking time off from family gatherings, claiming she needed to focus on her health. But no one was buying it. Not anymore. The silence she used to weaponize had become her prison. And me? I started writing. Just little essays at first, then a blog. I told my story, not with names, not to get sympathy, but to help others recognize what I didn't for so long. That love shouldn't feel like control, and truth doesn't have to scream to be heard. One night, months later, I sat across from James at a small diner. We'd just finished dinner. The check was paid. He looked out the window and said, almost to himself, "Funny thing about the truth. It doesn't go away just because someone buries it." I nodded. "No," I said, "but it's a hell of a thing when you finally dig it up." And for the first time in my life, I meant it. The past can't be changed. But the truth? The truth will always surface, especially when you stop being afraid of the noise it makes.